Hello and welcome. This is part 3 of the demo of the NAB K2 Sharepoint Search Broker. Today I'm going to talk about search. We've learned about so far about just simple camel queries, how to use parameters with those queries. Now we're going to tackle search. SharePoint search is a topic in and of itself for many weeks of detailed information. So a lot of that I'm not going to go into here, so forgive me if I graze over some details of how SharePoint's search actually operates. I'm going to take it for granted that those of you working with this have a good understanding of those concepts. If not, there's plenty of resources out on the web to go find that information. So today I'm just going to show you how to use that knowledge that you already have of SharePoint search to build queries that we can use from K2. So as before, we're going to use our configuration utility. You saw me create these first two camel queries. Let's create a search one. And again, I always forget to pick a folder. So I'm going to stick these in my folder 1 along with the other ones. So I have to give this a name just like I did before. So we're going to call this doc search. So we're going to call this par documents. It really doesn't make much difference here. In this case, the site URL and relative URL aren't necessary for a search query. So I'm going to also change my engine to the search engine. So in this case, when I fire my search off, it's going to use the site URL and relative URL to help filter that site. So if I wanted to limit that to one specific site, I would have to put those in here. In this case, I'm just going to leave them blank. That means it's going to search my entire SharePoint library or SharePoint site, SharePoint farm, excuse me, or however large that you've scoped your search to. In this case, your query here is your KQL or fast query. I've already built one of those queries here. Again, I'm not going to go into some of the details of how this operates, but you can see here this is a managed property. This is the name of a managed property that you would find in SharePoint and configured through the SharePoint Search Management page. So there's my simple query. I'm going to look only for this item code that has a specific value and where the author is myself in this case. So that said, I'm going to use the same methodology that we did before. I'm going to go ahead and go to my columns and I'm going to hit detect. As always, I'm prompted for my login credentials, and now it finds 46 columns. SharePoint Search is a very heavy operation. It brings back a significant amount of information, such as what rank, what's the document ID of what you're looking for, the work ID, which represents the specific instance of this search, of the index ID of where this item is found. It's brought back some default values for the things that it's interested in. It's brought me back URLs and so forth about this item. It's brought me back a significant amount of information. So let's take a look at some of this data and before we move forward. So I'm just going to hit the test button, and sure enough, we see all this information. A significant amount of information has been brought back to us. So if we look through this, we see a lot of information we may not be interested in, we may not want. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to then say, I'm going to specify some additional fields. Because let's say one of the fields that we didn't return was this item code itself. I know this is kind of redundant. We wouldn't search for something and then return it itself, but it's sufficient to prove the point of how this operates. So we're going to go to the final tab that we haven't gone to yet, and that's request columns. This tab is only used for search operations at the moment, at least. It might be used for more stuff in the future. However, in this case, what we're doing is we're specifying by providing a list of columns here. We're telling the search engine what other managed properties we are interested in returning. So since we're actually modifying the query, this value doesn't actually go into the query text itself. It goes into actually a part of the function call. So I'm going to go back to my columns now and I'm going to redetect. And once I do that, what we see is it's detected 18 columns are no longer returned by this query. What's actually happening here is every time when you fire these queries off without any requested columns, that SharePoint gives you back a kind of a default list of properties, such as the author and the size, the path, and some of these things. If you start requesting specific columns, it leaves those columns out. So I strongly suggest that you actually take advantage of the request columns feature to return explicitly the columns you want. Again, this does two things, one of which is it puts you in control of the columns that you're returning, and not SharePoint, because SharePoint doesn't know what you may have in mind for the data you're after. And in such event as SharePoint decides to change that you won't be at its mercy. You'll still be, you'll have specified the columns that you want. I certainly don't predict that changing, but again, this is about you choosing what you want to return from SharePoint. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. It removes those columns. It found 29 columns. It added one, which is no surprise because we actually asked for an additional column, and then it removed the other 18 that it didn't find. So now I can run my query, and sure enough, I get my, if I scroll over, I should see somewhere in here, there it is, that text column, that column that I asked for. And sure enough, it does return back exactly what we passed forward. So I want to show you another quick trick that you can do. I'm going to expand this out. I'm going to scroll down. Here's this new column that we asked for. It's way down here. I don't want it down there. I want it up at the top where I can see it. I know I don't have a choice with some of these other columns, but here's what you can do is I'm going to take every other column in between here, and I'm just going to delete it, say, because I really just want up to there. That's all I'm really interested in. I'm just going to delete those columns. That's moved this column up to the top, and then I'm just going to redetect. And again, it found 29 columns, and it's added all those columns back into this query. So, but it's added them at the bottom. This is simply so that to prevent me from needing to move a column all the way up or down. So if you did need to do that, certainly you could just use these arrow keys to move them around. This does not make any difference to SharePoint. It only makes a difference to you as the designer visually of how you want this stuff presented back to yourself. So in this case, this to me is a little bit cleaner. It's got all the columns that I'm actually interested in up here at the top. I'm going to select none now, and then again, just choose the columns that I'm after. So it'll be these first several. I'm going to turn off author just because I can. Now, additionally, just as we saw before, I've tested this query. This query is working. It's returning back the data that I want. So naturally, my next step would be to add a parameter. Certainly a hard code value here doesn't make much sense. So I'm going to put my cursor again where I want and then add parameter and give that a filter parameter called part number. Just as I did before, I'm going to go to my parameters tab and I'm going to hit detect. That creates my parameter. I'll give that a nice name, part number, and I'm going to skip the description for this point. So I'm just going to hit OK. As before, I'm going to save this file, go back to my service object tester, and refresh my service instance. So I'm going to expand that out, and now what I see are two actual service objects. So we had one query, but it actually returns us two different service objects. And I'll get to the details of that right now. So first, let's create our smart object for our part documents here. So I'll stick that in dev just as I did before. And let's give this a quick test before we move forward. So I'm going to come down to my new smart object, my parts document, and I'm going to enter the same part number that I did before. You may notice that there's a new refiner token down here as a memo field that was automatically added. We didn't see that when we configured this query, and I'll show you what that's for here in a second. But let's first just test this to make sure it works. So I'm going to execute it, and sure enough, I get a list of the files that I saw before in the same results. Great. Everything's working so far. I'm going to test this with another number, and how about Certainly I have to have a part number that I can see. So now we can see that it's working for several different parts. So now I see good and valid data coming out of this. Great. Now let's take a look at what this refiner information is all about. So I'm going to go to this other service object, which was automatically created for us when we refreshed the service instance. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a smart object for it, just out of the box. And let's take a look at it. So I'm just going to go ahead and execute this new smart object, and that'll give us a better idea. There's only a single method to this, and that's list refiner values. So what this is a smart object that service object that will list refiner values for the same query that you're specifying. So for example, in our case, when we execute this document search, this search against SharePoint, we could filter by any number of different methods, but we don't, since we may not know that at the time we're searching. So this gives you an option to be able to pull those values back. So let's take a look at what this actually returns. So our refiner field, this is the first parameter here, is the name of the field that you would like to refine on. So in this case, I'm going to refine on content type. In other words, I would like to see a list of all the content types of all the documents that meet my criteria, but I want them grouped by content type. And of course, I've got to give it a part number, which is the same search as before. So these are the only two required fields that I have to provide. I have to provide the same parameters to my original search as I did before, and I have to provide a field to group on. So let's go ahead and execute this. What this shows us is we have a total of 21 documents. To see the hit count here, there are 21 documents that match our criteria. And when we look at the different content types, again, SP content type being a specific SharePoint search managed property, we have a value name and an actual token, refiner token. So what we see here is there are product images, and there are 8 product image documents. Supplier quotes, 8. Part drawings, 3. Corrective actions, 2. So now what we've done is taken those 21 documents and been able to split them into, or group them by a specific field. So this allows you to execute a different type of search. Let's say if this was 1,000 documents, but you had broken it down into several different groups, you could then run this same query, giving the user a way to refine or filter down to the documents that they were only interested in. So what this provides is then the ability to then take one of these tokens and say, I'm interested in looking at these 8 supplier quotes. I'm just going to copy that value really quick, and I'm going to just paste it over into my notepad over here. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to run the same query in my other smart object. Enter the same part number as I did before, and I'm going to paste in that same refiner value. And I better get back only 8 rows this time, and that's exactly what I see here, is I get the same query results that I did before, except filtered by this specific content type. Let me give you a runtime example of how this really operates. So I'm going to do this using just a simple form. I've kind of abbreviated it all, so forgive me for not showing all the data value. We see the same values as we saw before in our other query, but up here at the top we see there are 21 values that have been returned, just same as we have with our smart object. We see there are 2 corrective actions, so I could filter down to just those 2 corrective actions. So up here at the top, I get a good summary of the documents that I'm interested in that meet my search criteria, and down below I get the actual list of the documents. So product images, if I select product images, I'm filtered down to just those, and then here's the actual results for my search. This can be a truly powerful feature because it spans across all SharePoint sites that are your search is configured to crawl against. This means that you can pivot on any kind of managed property that allows refinement. Again, you might need to look up in your specific environment which fields, which managed properties rather, are refinable in your SharePoint search configuration, your search schema. But if you have those configured and you're populating your metadata in SharePoint properly so that search can find it, and you're extracting that information into good managed properties, then this is the kind of function that you can provide. And you could provide a multi-level search, such as all corrective actions for a specific type of piece. And likewise, I could have this refined by corrective action, by part number, by several other values, and by concatenating those tokens together, you're able to actually do a very, very complex search. Again, this was a pretty quick overview of the search capabilities that's provided by this. There's a few more features that I certainly could go over, but now you have kind of the basics of how to execute a simple search using the NAB K2 SharePoint Search Broker. This concludes this three-part series on how this broker really functions. Based on user feedback, I may provide some more videos and tutorials about how this operates, some more advanced functions and advanced features such as the post-processing functions and calculator parameters and so forth. Those are things that again can just make your life easier from the K2 perspective by providing some functions which you may just be painful to execute in a K2 environment, but we might get to those in another series. This concludes this section. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me either on the forum or through this YouTube channel by comments on the posts, or on the GitHub. You can certainly pull all the source code for this and make comments and edits there. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.